Good morning, friends. Good morning. And it's me, Pastor Brian, woo-hoo, coming to you live. You don't have to ask, is it live or is it Memorex? It is live. I am here Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock. And this is episode 8 on our journey through the book of Daniel. This is PB Reads the Bible. I'm PB. Pastor here at Christ UMC. Great to be with you this morning. We've been doing this for quite a while, gone through a number of books, but currently we're on Daniel, and this is episode 8 of that, which means we'll be doing chapter 7. So after today, there's only 5 more. Only 5 more, because it's Daniel is 12 chapters. Let me double check on that, but that's what I have in my head anyway. I gotta be careful here because it goes into the other things, the additions to Daniel. Yes. Okay, so we are on, yes, it goes to chapter 12. So after today, there's only 5 more to go. And then we'll be done with Daniel, and we'll have to look at what else we could do. I'm thinking now that since there are these additions to Daniel, I might take a look at that. I'll let you know. Those probably won't be in your Bibles unless you have one that includes the Apocrypha. And we can discuss that some other time. Anyway, I'll have to work on that. Anyway, that's not why we're here today. Today it's going to be chapter 7. And good morning to all. And I see some folks checking in this morning. And go ahead and do that if you haven't already. And if you're not used to doing it, let me know you're there, because otherwise I just see a number. I don't see people. Good morning, Colleen, in the sanctuary. Virtually, I'm in the sanctuary. I'm actually in my office. But I selected a background image, and it is a picture from that I took in the sanctuary a year and a half ago, just after the pandemic began, during the shutdown, because I knew people were missing the sanctuary. So I took some pictures and I put it out there. Good morning, Marilyn, and good morning, Marcia. Good to see you folks. I'm sure there are some who will be joining us later. They won't be able to watch live. If you're not watching live, go ahead and check in anyway. I want to know that if you're caught up, and let me know too if you have questions, because I will be checking in. I check in throughout the day and over the next day or two, whenever you're watching, to see. Feel so at home. I have an extra reason for picking this image. It goes, I think it ties in with some of the imagery, or at least what I'm going to say about the imagery from chapter 7. So yeah, use the comment section for questions or comments, or text me if you wanted to text me about anything. 570-351-1619. Sorry, I got an email about something, but I'll look at that later. So setup. We have finished the first half of Daniel. We might almost be able to call it, first Daniel, or Daniel 1. And now we're going to move into Daniel 2. Or second Daniel, whatever way you want to phrase it, because 2 different time periods, 2 different types of narrative, 2 different types of writing, at least 2 different authors of the original content, the same editor, or the same final editor, who combined the stories of the first 6 chapters, 6 individual stories, and they were most likely circulated in that way as 6 individual stories, but then the editor pulled them together, probably added some text to help them flow together even a little bit better and connect them to each other, but also took this second half by at least one other author, writing in a much different time period. Chapters 1 through 6 are stories that come from the 3rd century BCE. So somewhere around 260 years before Christ. Okay, is when chapters 1 through 6 were written. Chapters 7 through 12 come from the 2nd century BCE, circa 163, 164 BCE, about 164 years before Christ, we would say. Okay, how do we know that? We'll get to it. We're able to date it, at least in part, or narrow it down based on a good understanding of this chapter 7. Now, the editor did a wonderful job putting this book together. Good morning, Don. Good to see you this morning as well. And the the editor picked chapter 7, placed it in the perfect place, the perfect spot. It is a transition from the first half to the second half. It wouldn't have worked if he put it as chapter 8 or if he switched anything. And we can learn a couple things from it. A couple things I want to say about it, I guess, before we get started right into it. I want you to notice that almost immediately, starting in verse 2, it becomes it is written in first person from Daniel, from Daniel's point of view. Okay, it is written in the first person, meaning it's all I, Daniel, I saw this, I did this, I heard this, the person spoke to me. It is that tense the rest of the book. Verse 1 sets that up just by saying, in the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. Okay, so that's verse 1 of chapter 7, and it only has to do, it's kind of setting everything up, and from there on and through the rest of this book, it's in first person from Daniel. Okay, so I'm going to read the whole thing. Then we'll go back through and kind of break down and point out a few things. One last thing to remember. This is apocalyptic literature, which does deal with eschatology, the end times, but not as a way of predicting what's going to happen. We should not read Daniel literally, and we should not read it as a prediction of the future, or even as a prediction of the past. This chapter, we'll see Daniel is talking about his past, or the author of Daniel, the author of this section, quote unquote, Daniel, is writing about his past and his present, and a hopeful vision for the future. It is all a message of hope for people living in a very distressing time. 164-ish BC, the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He would have been the ruler of the Hellenistic Empire, the Seleucids at the time, and he had done horrible things. He wanted to completely eliminate Judaism. Does that sound familiar? Actually, something that's taken place several times over history. But he really wanted to do it. He wanted to establish an empire-wide religion. Only certain things were allowed, all that kind of stuff. The man was brutal. When they found babies who had been circumcised, he hung them from the necks of the corpses of the mothers. Okay, disgusting, revolting, horrible person. horrible person. There's no other way to describe him. Well, there is, but not in polite company, we might say. So that is the person and the type of situation that the first hearers and readers of this story would be living in. So they needed a message of hope and of God's ultimate vindication for God's faithful people. For God's faithful people. It's all a way of providing hope and telling people to stay strong, stick with trusting in God and with being good Jewish people. Okay, so the story. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then, as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, "Arise, devour many bodies." After this, as I watched, another appeared, like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth and was devouring, breaking in pieces and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns when another horn appeared, a little one coming up among them. To make room for it, 3 of the earlier horns were plucked up by the roots. There were eyes like human eyes in this horn, and a mouth speaking arrogantly. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. And as I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was giving dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was troubled within me, and the visions of my head terrified me. I approached one of the attendants to ask him the truth concerning all this. So he said that he would disclose to me the interpretation of the matter. As for these 4 great beasts, 4 kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth concerning the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet, and concerning the 10 horns that were on its head, and concerning the other horn which came up, and to make room for which 3 of them fell out, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that seemed greater than the others. As I looked, this horn made war with the holy ones and was prevailing over them until the Ancient One came. Then judgment was given for the holy ones of the Most High, and the time arrived when the holy ones gained possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth that shall be different from all the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall rise, and another shall arise after them. This one shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, shall wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law. And they shall be given into his power for a time, 2 times, and half a time. Then the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and totally destroyed. The kingship and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. Here the account ends. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly terrified me, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter in my mind. Excuse me one moment, I got a text and I should read it. Check it out. Sorry, did need to take care of that quickly. All right, wow, what an amazing piece of literature. Very dramatic, very sensual. It's very sensual, meaning it really strikes the senses very powerfully. Apocalyptic literature is like that, and it's like that for several different reasons. The biggest one of which it uses mythology. It uses mythology. Now, when you hear the word myth in common context, it has an idea of a lie associated with it. Oh, you're just telling a myth. That's just a lie. That's not the purpose of a myth, and that's not what we mean when we talk about something being mythological. The purpose of a myth is to explain or express something that cannot otherwise be expressed. So when you think about the ancient myths of the Middle East and of Greece and Rome, they're trying to express the inexpressible in the best ways possible. And if you follow if you went through Genesis with me, we talked about this a lot then, especially when we were talking about creation stories, the 2 creation stories. So that's the purpose of myth, and myth uses vivid imagery and symbolism a lot in order to talk about it. Now, the author of Daniel probably used some Greek, some Hellenistic myths when he, or she, was writing this story down. The author of this section of Daniel was probably doing that. The other reason for this vivid imagery and symbolism is it's a safe way of speaking truth to power. It's a safe way of addressing something that was taking place right then and there without the people on the outside knowing what you were talking about. The author of Daniel 7, Daniel here in 7, would not have wanted Antiochus Epiphanes IV or any of his henchmen to get word that he was talking about him. And so putting it in this kind of language, it's setting up as a myth and all that, he wouldn't get the point. He wouldn't get the point. presumably the intended audience, the target audience, they would have had a better understanding of Jewish culture and of this style of writing, this genre. Excuse me. Okay, so the thing with apocalyptic literature and this vivid imagery, it's being so sensual, it's almost like it needs to be sung. It's almost like it needs to be sung. Perhaps why several pieces of apocalyptic literature get turned into beautiful pieces of music, because it readily adapts itself to that kind of stuff. And artwork, paintings, this kind of stuff lends itself to that very, very, very well. Bright, bold colors, you can picture it in your mind. That's what this kind of stuff, this kind of writing does. I have no idea who Victoria Miller is. We'll have to look at that. Sometimes people spam us because they can, but we like to keep our page open and public. So I don't know. I'll read that full message later and see if it needs to be deleted. Anyway, back to this, right? So that kind of sets the stage. What's happening? What's taking place? So Daniel has this vision, this dream, and he writes down the vision. He writes down the dream. Then he admits that he can't understand it. Again, this is apocalyptic. This is the tradition. This is the style of the writing. This is the style. This is how the genre worked. A human character. Oh, good morning, Cheryl. Would often have a vision, maybe even being taken away to a different place, something cosmological, a place and a vision that a person wouldn't normally be able to see or go to. Sometimes they're able to explain it themselves, but usually they need someone to interpret it for them. They need a guide. In some cases, the guide is God, God's self, is the most holy one, as this says, or the Ancient of Days, the Most High One, whatever way your Bible might translate it. Sometimes it is God's self, the Most Holy One, that does the interpretation and speaks directly to the individual experiencing the vision. Other times it is an angel, we might say, or one of the other heavenly beings. That's the case here. Sometimes, though, Hebrew literature is excuse me, Hebrew literature is cool, and it's not static, it's not stable, it moves around a lot. So sometimes we're not sure if it is an angel or if it is God. For instance, when the burning bush, when Moses approaches the burning bush, it says it's the voice of God, but it's a messenger of God. So which is it? It's, kind of moves back and forth. Same thing when Jacob wrestles with God. It's also described as wrestling with an angel. So, it can be confusing. It's not static. It's not static, which is cool, because that allows for different understandings. Although that can sometimes cause us issues. Because we don't like having different understandings. We like having one thing. This is what it means, period. No, that's not the case. Anyway, so he has the vision. He writes about it, but he's confused about it. And he asks one of the heavenly beings to explain it to them. And they do. So what is it? We've got a vision of beasts coming up out of the sea, up out of the water, right? Coming up out of the sea. If you were with me when we went through Genesis, and we've talked about it in other places too, the sea, sources of water, are symbols of chaos. So this is creation. This is a creation story taking place, creation or recreation. And this is chaos trying to break in on God's created world. And so coming up out of chaos is these beasts, these kingdoms, trying to take over God's world. Okay. And yes, there are 4 beasts. Think back to chapter 2, to that story there where there was that tall tower, only 9 feet wide, but 90 feet high, or however it was. Yeah, right, 6 by 60. And it was 4 different beasts, or I'm sorry, 4 different types of metal, 4 different substances creating it, and it was 4 different kingdoms. Well, here it's the same story, only told in a different way. And so it's 4 kingdoms, but they're 4 beasts. Now, rather than trying to say exactly why a particular animal, that's not important. We can, yes, the first one is the Babylonian Empire, and yes, the eagle was an important symbol for them, but that comparison doesn't hold true really to the others. But the first one is the Babylonian Empire. The second one is the quote unquote Median Empire. The third one is the Persian Empire. And then the 4th beast with all those horns on it is the Hellenistic Empire, started by Alexander the Great. But it gets confusing at this point because historically everything may not fit perfectly, but that's okay. Now, it does say that beast takes over the whole world. Well, Alexander's empire, the empire under Alexander, pretty much took over the known world. It went everywhere. So that definitely fits this classification. And even if it didn't, he claimed that it did. And the empire claimed that it did, that it was everywhere. Whether or not it did doesn't matter. Looking at the succeeding kings of that empire, the people that came after Alexander, depending on how you look at them and number them and stuff like that, you can come up with the 10. You can come up with enough of them. But there's things that not all the details work, so to speak. Now, this extra horn, though, that comes up and disrupts everything and takes out 3 in order to make room for him, is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And it's like, without a doubt, it is him. And he did kill a couple different people in order to become king, in order to lead that empire. However, there's another way of looking at it, that the 10 aren't different kings, they're actually contemporaries of his. So whatever, we're not 100% sure. But we're confident in saying that this extra horn is Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who spoke very arrogantly. That would be like about the way he was trying to get rid of religion, trying to change the laws, as the angel or the heavenly being said in their discussion, that he would try to change the sacred seasons and the law. Change the sacred seasons and the law. Excuse me a moment. I'm gonna hit mute on that. Because that's what he did. He tried to get rid of the Jewish religion, sacrificed pigs on the sacred altar, and all that stuff taking place. All right. So it's him. Now we get into another confusing part. So we got the first half of the vision figured out. And the next part, the next wonderful part and confusing part, we have the throne room being set up. So obviously it's a picture of, since it's a throne room, we can, the imagery would be that of a court, and judicial proceedings taking place. And so this is why I have the sanctuary behind me, because it's a throne room with God. Now, don't ask me exactly how they have this understanding, but at least one of the understandings of this section is that it was meant to indicate the temple, that the description of this whole place was meant to indicate the temple. I get at least part of it, because God comes in and sits on the throne. And in Judaic culture at that time and before, God's throne was on the Ark of the Covenant, between, on the mercy seat. That's where God sat. So Daniel, the author of Daniel, may very well be setting up and indicating the temple. That does fit with our understanding that he was trying to speak to the Hasidim, which are the people who are trying to live faithfully at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And so he's reminding them about the temple, although without actually saying the temple, because the temple had mostly been at least partially destroyed. No, but by this time it was mostly rebuilt, I guess, or at least partially rebuilt, but now no longer usable because it was no longer clean because of the king. All right. But so God comes in along with all the heavenly courts and this wonderful thing, and the books are opened. Now the books can have different meanings, depending on different passages in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it would have been two different understandings, I guess you'd say. One was that all recorded history and all people before their existence and everything about them. The second understanding is that there's a book that each person is listed, and everything they do is then recorded in it, both good and bad. And so this is bringing up this imagery of this judicial case taking place to find out who is worthy and who needs to be punished. So it is a vision of a, we might say, the last judgment, but at least a last judgment. Now, theologically, we shouldn't think that that's how it works, because that's not how it works. God doesn't have a ledger where God, where you can kind of wipe away the bad things that you did. And, well, you got 5 good things, but you've got 6 bad things, so you're out of here. We don't think that way because of Jesus and because of God's amazing grace. However, we can assume or presume that would have been the understanding at the time. And so this is that hopeful message for the people of that were there to hold faith, keep doing what you're doing. Your names are going to be written in the good book, and God will be vindicated. God will be vindicated. Next we have this vision of one like a son of man. Who is this person? And is it a person or a group of people? Because it can be either. Again, Jewish literature, even though the tense is singular for this person, son of man, it's a singular, not a plural. It can be a group. A group can be singular. A group is singular, actually, when you think about it. So it could be referring to just a group rather than a person. Obviously, it's been taken to mean something that it probably didn't mean at the time. Why do I say that? Well, because it can be confusing. First off is the line in verse, and this is in verse 13. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being, or like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. Okay. The preposition there, with, can actually be translated a couple different ways. Oftentimes it's translated as on. Now, if it's coming on a cloud, on the clouds, that would indicate and visualize coming on the clouds would be already up there and coming down to earth. It's usually translated, and is translated here in the NRSV, as with the clouds of heaven, which the scholars think would have more of an imagery of moving up, called clouds coalescing and going up to heaven. Now that does fit the context as it carries into the next line, because he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. If Daniel is referring to a messianic figure, the literal son of God or son of man, that person presumably would already be in God's presence and wouldn't need to come with the clouds. So we shouldn't see it as a messianic figure, I guess is what I'm saying. It sounds more like a human being, one who's like a son of man, or who is literally a son of man, or prefigures a son of man. However, it can also be, because of that, it can be a group. It can be a group. Maybe the author is speaking of a newly formed and individualistic, or well, not individualistic, self-ruling Israel, nation of Israel, coming forth, being presented before God. So maybe not, but a person or a group of people who are faithful and are presented to God, and who will then be given a kingdom that will last forever. And so anywhere where you, from there on, especially in the ending, the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heavens shall be given to the people of the Holy One of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. Okay, so this would be that Son of Man with the clouds, and this group of holy ones are probably speaking about those, that Hasidim, those people who were being faithful, being good Jews, and it's speaking of their vindication. Speaking of their vindication and God's vindication and their ultimate victory, and that promise of a kingdom that shall have no end. Of course, that passage has been taken to mean, and that those words, Son of Man, or like a son of man, or like a human being, has over these years and centuries been taken and applied to Jesus. We can do that when Jesus fits the description, we might say, but we shouldn't see that as the original context or intention of the author of the passage. Okay, two entirely different things. And why does Jesus fit that description, or why does that? Matthew uses the term, Matthew, Mark, and Luke actually use the term several times, multiple times, with Jesus, but always by Jesus. Jesus is the one that says them, that says it. And he's usually describing things that he is currently doing. He's not talking about predictions about how things are going to happen. John does that, and the book of Revelation does that, but Jesus doesn't. So probably not meant to be Jesus, probably not meant to be a messianic figure in Daniel. Well, friends, not too bad, 9:38. I thought it was going to be a whole lot longer going through that one. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be live at 9 a.m. and that'll probably be it for this week. I don't think I'm going to do a pre-recording for Friday. You've had enough pre-recordings. I prefer to do this live. If for no other reason, I could talk longer than a half hour. But my friends, I pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something, that God has spoken to you through something I've said, something we've read together. As you go about your days, keep your eyes and ears open for what God is doing in your life. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thanks, God, and then tell somebody about it. Be blessed, my friends.